The next session is a panel where we're going to get a view from the ecosystem. So we'll get a view from, I'd like to invite the panel up in the meantime. So we'll get a view from some of the experts and some of the people that have been looking at this, both from the operator side and from the technology side. So I will hand over to Chris.
Okay, I think we're the final panel before Q&A, and hopefully everyone's enjoyed the previous panels. And now we'll spend some time talking with some of the operators and vendors in the space. We've heard about the standards. We've heard from Taylor and team with a fantastic report that came out on Friday. Again, plug that, encourage everyone to take a look. And now we'll get a perspective of how this is playing out in industry. And so to start, we'd love to just kick it off with everyone introducing themselves. And in introducing yourself, I'd love to hear a bit about how you got into this space.
Okay, I'll start it off. My name is Ray Octaviano. I'm head of the business development for IDEMIA. And so at IDEMIA, we make the security credentials, either for consumers or for the endpoints. So for example, that would be credit cards, driver's licenses, passports. And for the telecommunication industry, that would be SIM cards and what it's evolving to in the eSIM. And so my job is to explain to our customers changes in technology and how those changes will affect their business. And so as far as how we got into it, quantum computing is something that we're looking at now, specifically to see with all the new technologies that are coming, how can it be managed at the endpoint. And so there's a team that has been working on these questions, and then my job is to help get the information out there and make our customers aware of it, of what it might mean to them.
Hi, I'm Zig. I'm part of the IBM research team working on quantum safe for industries and networks. One of the things I've been finding is that there's a huge amount of interest in lots of different parts, governments, in other industries, including financial sector, including the energy business, which is in the middle of a huge transition. And so I've been trying to drill into what it takes to make industries quantum safe, and also deep diving into what it looks like as we try and make the telecoms networks quantum safe. How did I get into this? When I was a kid, I met a guy called Otto Frisch, who was one of the people who invented nuclear fission, or discovered nuclear fission, along with his aunt, Lise Meitner. And that kind of got me interested in this sort of physics and stuff. And then a few years ago, I tried to figure out how you might apply quantum computing to the telecoms industry. And that kind of drove it. The first priority was really the transition to quantum safe crypto.
Great. Hi, I'm Lamont Copeland. I am the director of Verizon's Federal Solution Architecture team. What we do on a day-to-day basis is working with each one of our federal customers to drive efficiencies, build out new network technologies and capabilities to meet the mission sets of the Department of Defense, the civilian agencies, and national security. We've been doing this for about 25 years now in my career, and a lot of it, which got me into this, was just really the boom of when telecom first came out. When I remember when I was doing this, coming as a grad out of Penn State in '99, was really, oh, I'm going to be a chip designer. I'm going to do a lot of this fun stuff, go work at Intel or someplace like that. And then all of a sudden this technology of the internet and the true building out of it, when you started getting into the IP networks, moving away from X25 ATM and frame relay and moving into that, and the power of what it could do. And from there, it just kind of blossomed my interest into that, moving into areas of then, how do I then protect that network? How do I protect all of the citizens? How do I protect ourselves to be able to do what we love to do day to day, so that I can go and watch a little bit more Netflix and see a little bit more of my Star Wars that I like to be able to watch on net. So, but my team on a day-to-day basis is, like I said, it's to take the technology and drive mission outcomes for our customers, and ensuring that they understand how this technology is applied to them and how they can bring that into their environments and utilize it on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thanks, Lamont. And I'd be remiss in not sharing, at Sandbox we really see the adoption of PQC as, we talk about the risk and the threat, but really as an opportunity, and we're going to talk a bit about this, how each organization sees it really as an opportunity for really how we think about cybersecurity, how we think about foundational cryptography as part of that cybersecurity is an opportunity to really change how we interact and control our cryptography. So maybe, Lamont, to start with you, what do you see as the main driver for adoption, both within your organization and also with customers? Like, what is the current driver?
Yeah, so at Verizon, we're really focused on building reliable, secure networks. That's part of our DNA. That's part of what we're going to deliver out to each one of our customer sets. So what that includes is not only just rigorous testing and driving into standards and requirements that are the underpinning of everything that we do, but then how do we then take that and then leverage that over with our vendors and talk with them? How do we make sure that they're supplying and not only what the NIST standards are, but also our own high standards of making sure that we're delivering quality services out to each one of our customers, whether it's a B2B, business-to-business customer, or a business-to-a-consumer customer, B2C, or B2B2C, business-to-business to consumer. It's important for us to be able to get that. So we're making sure that we're taking a very pragmatic approach, as you heard from before. We're very pragmatic and thoughtful with when we go into how we deliver our services, and really getting involved with the how. How do we make sure that this is going to be taking place? We are, part of the things which we're excited to be in working with the Standards Committee, where one of our members is actually part of the PQC migration that Dustin talked about earlier. We're going to be joining in there and making sure that we're providing our insight, what we can do from a testing standpoint, and how we see this ecosystem working and collaborating together between industry and standards bodies. But then what we're seeing as drivers is we need to help our customers understand what this technology is, what it is. So, Gabrielle said it great. We need to make sure that we're having people understand what these risk frameworks are, what the technology is, and make it relatable to them, and update what they're thinking about that today. As I'm working through with my customers, they're working on a lot of network transitions, a lot of network transformations. The federal government, there's a lot of aging equipment, aging technology, aging software. Natasha, you said it best. We're running Windows 2000 still inside of some of these things. There's still some mainframe capabilities out there. All these things aren't going to change overnight. So, and everyone knows and understands the risk. They hear about it and they talk about it. There's a lot of government bodies that are being stood up to be able to work on these things. But hearing the words and understanding them and relating them to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, whether you're a CTO, a IT professional, or somebody in middle management, how do I take that and understand how do I take that understanding of that technology and the self relating to that, and then driving that back into what I need to do to be able to transform my network, transform my services, both from what I'm seeing inside the enterprise, how that interconnects with the public WAN network itself, wide area network that we provide to each one of our customers to get packets across the world, and then how does that then drive to the efficiencies that we need to be able to see today. So that's where we see that we need to be able to help with is the understanding of how to consume a lot of this technology. There's a lot of really great things we're talking about with post-quantum. The question is, how do you then make that relatable so that you can then understand how to do the planning and the risk assessment, and then move that into the smaller chunks of success to be able to then be prepared for the future of post-quantum.
Great, thanks, Lamont. And Zig, how do you see this adoption? Where are you seeing the most demand from your perspective, and what are some of the barriers that you're seeing when engaging with folks in market?
Well, I think in terms of adoption, it's clear that there are areas like the US government that are very much ahead of, I think, the rest of the world. And that's both a plus and it's also a challenge, because everybody else, all the other governments are looking at this and going, when should we be doing this? So you've got, on the one hand, that gives you as a positive thing. And one of the things I'd like to observe is one of the single most useful things I've seen is the CISA guidance and the CNSA timeline, because it actually puts on paper, these are the timelines to think about and the sorts of systems to think about updating and how to prioritize them, whether it be things like web servers or custom applications, or then networking gear. So that's really helpful. When we then look at other industries and adoption, they've got to build the same framework themselves. In the telecoms industry, we've now got a year's worth of understanding of what it means to make our networks quantum safe. We're starting to think about how to embed this into 3GPP and all the future standards. So there's already a whole group of operators who are running internal projects, who are doing let's figure out the inventory, let's figure out the roadmap, let's think about, as Luke said earlier, some of the potential quantum safe services we can offer. But then other industries have to do the same thing. And I think one of the challenges they face is that how does financial services, for example, or how does the energy business build a model for how they make that industry quantum safe? Energy is going to go. We're in the biggest energy transition in 100 years as we move from baseload-based generation to generation based on intermittent energy sources. That means the network control plane for energy will be as complex as it is for telecoms. Now is the time to think about how we embed PQC into that.
Right, with different timelines based on that network. And Ray, maybe a bit more on kind of where are you seeing the demand from your perspective, and what are the barriers? If there is a real appetite for adoption, what barriers may be in place that we still need to work through?
So from the SIM card perspective, there's not a lot of places that asymmetric keys are used in the network today. But there is one place that's emerging right now with that transition to eSIM. So the eSIM technology today relies on 256-bit elliptical curve to set up a transport key to get securely the contents of the eSIM down to the device. And with post-quantum computers or quantum computers expected to compromise ECC, that then means your transport key can be compromised, which will then compromise the contents of the eSIM, which contains the keys for that particular device. And this, of course, then brings a fraud risk, both to the network, and it also brings a privacy risk to the end user. So that's where we're seeing a lot of the focus from the SIM card world. As far as the challenges, I think the realization that crypto agility is going to be needed is already there. The challenge will be that you don't have that flexibility today in the SIM card because there's a cost associated with implementing crypto agility. It's effectively an over-the-air update, and to do an over-the-air update, you need more memory, you need more processing power, you need a more sophisticated microprocessor, which ultimately leads to a higher cost. And then on top of that, when you're talking about actually changing over the air the cryptographic operation of the endpoint, that's pretty much like changing yourself, because these cryptographic operations are what's protecting the ability to update over the air and preventing bad actors from updating over the air. So it won't be very simple, and it'll also have a cost impact, and these are the things that we'll have to work through to try to minimize both.
Great, thanks. Zig, back to you. We've talked about the risk, the threats, but I think we also all see the opportunity in this new technology and these new standards, and would love to hear your perspective on how this migration can be a great opportunity for the enterprise.
Right. So if you think about this transition, so there's a set of things we're going to have to do. We're going to have to update our infrastructure. We're going to have to update the security systems that guard privileged access. So there's a set of plumbing that's necessary. But then you can say, well, what are the opportunity areas? And you can perhaps think of them in 4 groups. One is the services that mobile operators offer to enterprise customers. A second, the services that are offered to government customers. Third, consumer services. And then fourth, actually the interactions between the operators themselves. And so if we unpick each of those, enterprise customers, obviously financial services customers will be very interested in ensuring that the underlying networks that they use are secure. And so that's a thing. But also enterprise customers will want quantum safe VPNs. That's clearly a thing that will be really important in the future, and that's something that I think is an opportunity for operators to develop a new service. And you've heard about the Vodafone and Sandbox proof of concept there. That's a great example. If you think about government, we've already had the observations that Lamont and has told us about the services that companies like Verizon offer. Operators will need to secure all of their management portals, probably as the first thing, even before they look about making new quantum safe services, because the underlying identity management systems are one of the things that are really important, and you want to ensure that the provisioning of the president's phone and all the first responders systems are secure. So clearly that's an important area. Now, I don't think you're ever going to sell quantum safe along with your iPhone or TikTok or whatever. But there are some countries where 75+% of GDP goes through mobile money. And the central bank governors in those countries will be really, really keen that the consumer services are secure, because that fundamentally affects the entire national economy. So actually things like mobile money services may be early places where operators can make quantum safe services for the mass market. And then finally, if we think about how operators work together, exchanging roaming information, exchanging settlement data, and we've seen the attacks on some of the providers in that space, so clearly that's also a place where we might want to see some services being updated, and that's potentially an upside as well.
Great. Same question to you, Lamont. Where do you see really the opportunity from a telco perspective in this migration?
Yeah, no, I see this as an opportunity for us to be able to work together to build out that greater awareness and understanding how all these different areas work and relate to one another. So, like Zig was saying, there's what we need to do with the enterprise and how we're viewing the portals and these things there. But some of the things, and I'm going to steal a little bit from one of my other questions I'm putting in this one here, thinking through this, is how do we look at the interrelationships when we start going through this inventory? We are very good at pulling together lists. We all get, we get the directives, we get what we need from each one of our, whether it's from our CEO or from our general or whoever it may be, and say, get a list of an inventory of X, an inventory of Y or Z. And the question is we get that, but then do we understand the interrelationships between all these things? And I think there's an opportunity to understand how all the networking components, the applications, the data themselves interrelate to one another, so that then you can take that and move that into some of the planning that you have today, so that you're not dealing with it and it's this, okay, I have another mission set that I have to deal with now putting in post-quantum. No, it is part of what we're doing today to continue to keep up with the pace of technology and the evolution of technology that we're having. So at the very beginning, AI was brought up and talked about here. We're all looking at how do we maintain and do our data architectures, how do we manage that, how do we make sure that we're understanding, how do we leverage AI into our environments. Same type of thing we have to do when we're talking about quantum and talk about this. And when you look at that, you talk about the interrelationship between all these things. When I understand how my data, the applications and the data and what they're being done and how the network is supporting them in each one of the servers and how they're being worked, and then tying that back to each one of the mission sets that we're doing, or each one of the business objectives that we're doing, then it's easier to become and understand what your risk posture should be. And then you can figure out how do you do the planning, and then how do you incorporate these things in there. And then you can say, okay, it's not such a big chunk for us to be able to take one. While I'm upgrading my Cisco router, or I'm upgrading my NVIDIA server, I can be also working on what my crypto will be. And then also looking at, okay, while this is my newest technology and I'm bringing it into place, am I ready for the next one, the next crypto agility part that we were talking about earlier today?
Right, and kind of building off of that, With the inventory piece, say we see that, I think all agree, is really the first step in this migration. Like, what do we have now? How do we triage? How do we prioritize? And then how are you thinking as an organization beyond the inventory, right? You're talking about all the interoperability and all the dependencies. What comes next after that on this PQC journey? How are you seeing this play out? And we're talking, we all, I think, also agree this is a multi-year, potentially decade-long timeline if precedent serves us well. How are you thinking about sort of these next stages?
Yeah, no, and I think Gabrielle, Ariston, and Taylor said it great. I mean, you're going to have to take this in chunks. And you look at this in that multi-stage phase, realizing that it's going to be iterative. You're going to go back and forth with what you look at. You're going to try these different things with your networks. You're going to do different things with virtualization, with hardware, and you're going to say, okay, this worked, that did not, and then we're going to have to go and reiterate and then push out those practices or not bring them. But also talking across amongst one another. You know, there is the cooperative between all of us, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. We've got to all then work together, figure out how do we push the 5G, the virtualization of our networks, the virtualization of our customers' networks, and how do we then incorporate all this, the thoughts of what we need to do to bring crypto inside of our network to be able to stay up with these standards, but then how do we tie this into our services and then educate our customers about this too as well so they understand how to bring that to bear. So it's going to be that continual iteration back and forth, but understanding that these are going to be broken into chunks. It's going to be broken into how do I then manage a small IoT sensor system, get that up to speed, get the lessons learned, move that, either amplify it or tweak it to go into your next, where we get up to places like your headquarters and places where there's large financial data systems. Then we know that we're pretty much going to be on the right path of being able to be successful with the migration.
Great. And Ray, as you've engaged with the market and talked about this path, and we're thinking about fear of change, awareness of this threat writ large, is it a wait and see mentality that you're coming into, or folks waiting, hey, I want to see more certainty around the regulatory environment, I want to wait for some industry to move before I start to commit resources to this? Is it just a lack of awareness? Kind of what's sort of the themes that you're starting to pick up? And
yeah, that's a great question. So I would say we're seeing it in kind of two steps. The obvious step for probably everyone in the room is on the telecom side, where everything needs to be standards-based, and there's a very sequential step for things to be standards-based. So the NIST needs to define what the algorithms that are approved will be. That then needs to go into the standards organizations to become a part of the standards. The equipment makers then take those standards, implement the process. So there's a long chain there that'll certainly have to go through its normal course before the networks themselves are really beginning to implement these changes. But what we're seeing is that there's also a need for particular stakeholders, such as governments or people that have very high value, long lifetime type of data that need to start getting ready sooner. And that's an area where the SIM card as a secure element can play a part in providing a service that runs over a mobile network, but doesn't really need the mobile network itself to make changes to implement those kinds of services. So still very early days, but how do you make secure links that are supported by a credential within the SIM card that will be post-quantum resistant? That's kind of the first step that we think will be rolled out soon, much ahead of the networks themselves that have this sequence they have to go through before it's appropriate.
Great, thanks. And Zig, similar question, how you've seen from your perspective both the adoption rate, the willingness or unwillingness, the awareness of this. You know, part of this whole event is really to continue to raise awareness of this point. But where would you see the most, where we could generate the most return on just an investment in either awareness or walking through the steps to take, making the enterprise aware of the cost, but also the benefits? Kind of how have you thought about approaching this as you educate the market?
Right. So, I mean, there's the biggest challenge I think we always face is everybody says, yes, but when will this happen? So that is a challenge that we have to address, and many of the people we've talked to don't spend a lot of their time keeping up with developments in quantum computing, and so they're unaware of just how rapid the progress is in the systems that are being made available. And so that's actually one thing that we do need to communicate. Look, there is a fairly impressive trajectory across the quantum computing business. But if you then think about where you see adoption, and one of the areas that we've been trying to get people to think about is, if you think about the telco, the entire telco infrastructure. On the one hand, you've got OSS and BSS systems, you've got the API gateways that connect with other operators, you've got your customer data. Below that, you have the network. And actually, the network will get, the transition for the network will be based on standards. So all the work that Luke and Laurie have been doing to get the NGMN to put this into the future requirements, that will go through the process because we know how that works. But below that, we talked about virtualization. You looked about the NFVI, or some operators run their packet core on public clouds. Now there, I think, is actually the place I recommend people to start thinking about early. Think about how your identity management is secured. Think about how the TLS connections that you make to those cloud providers. Once we have the NIST standards agreed, and once the critical open source projects that give us TLS and the like are implemented, then I think that's where the early benefit will be. It's in updating that infrastructure. And beyond that, the security pillar, identity management, the PKI, the certificate authorities, the HSMs that support all of those systems will be I think the second thing, because those can be done independent of us needing 3GPP to complete the work it's doing, and it also gives us early experience of what this transition looks like in an area that's not necessarily public facing. I think then beyond that, you then get into things like the operator APIs, because again, that's an area that doesn't require a full raft of standards. Some of those APIs are specific to individual operators, and those can perhaps be the next wave.
Great, thanks. And part of this journey and working backwards, we have the store now, decrypt later threat. Lamont, would love to hear from the telco perspective, how does that manifest? How do you both think about it internally, and again, same question, how do you also counsel and engage with your customers on that piece in particular?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And when we're looking at it at multiple vectors of security and looking at it holistically of what needs to be done to protect the network. So we're taking it in multiple phases when we work with any of our customers. But before we do anything and deliver any services out to our customer, it's really how do we build that network security internally to our networks? How do we make sure that we're protecting our OSS, BSS systems, the APIs that are being used to be able to deliver network insights and then do some network, interactions between the different applications for each one of our vendors? How do we make sure that those data planes, the network assets and everything are secured? And then having also built internally to the network a way to deliver a connection which is secured from end to end, from the edge of the customer's environment to the other edge of the customer environment across the board. But then going in and taking it a bit further, and this is where my team comes into play, because that's done more on our network engineering teams and the great work that our teams do. But then I come into play with my team to understand how do you then deal with those things from a ransomware standpoint? How do you deal with the things from a social insider threat? How do you then take care in building your networks, building in the certificates, building in the PKI, building in the right capabilities, all the way down to firewalls, to the crypto itself? What's necessary that needs to be done to protect it so that you don't run into any of these scenarios, whether it's a store now, decrypt later, or if it's a ransomware attack, those things, all those things are something that we want to look at holistically, because when you're taking that full picture view of it, then we're trying to make sure that you have the right protection measures built into place, you have the right technology built into place, but then you're also looking at how do you get there in a roadmap standpoint too as well, because we also understand, again, Natasha, you said it best, we are not going to be able to upgrade all this stuff really quickly. And there's a lot of legacy stuff, not just in the federal government, but there's also you'll be surprised, in a lot of enterprise customers too as well, that you go, what's this server doing on Joe's network? Oh, that's running all of our protection measures that's for our financials that are going on. You go, whoa, why is it on a desk? So all right, let's figure out a good way to protect that. So that's where we're trying to make sure that you see those insights, understand what's necessary, and bring this into, again, all the really cool things that we all like to talk about that's really sexy, and the mathematics and the algorithm is saying, okay, here's what you need to do, for lack of words, a defense in-depth type of thing for whatever your environment is, and continue to build that along the way while you're either going to transition your environment, or if it's going to stay the same, just continue to transition your security so that we're protecting what we have today, which is our precious assets and data.
Yeah, great, thanks. So in the remaining few minutes, maybe we'll end on a very forward-looking, what's next? So from your perspective, where you sit, engaging with the market, what is next on this journey? And you can use define next however you wish, to really move industry towards quantum safe.
So I think from our perspective, it's what Dustin suggested earlier. Particularly being at the endpoint, we face a lot more constraints as far as processing power, electrical power, but then also the user experience becomes really important, because it's not just a question of can we execute these new cryptographic algorithms, but what is the time frame it takes to do that? Is it something that's going to be acceptable to the user? Nobody likes to be staring at their device waiting for a connection or email or anything else to come through. So how can those endpoints accommodate those new functions that they'll be expected to execute? I think is a key next step for our investigation of how to get our customers to be post-quantum ready.
Great, thanks. Zig?
Well, firstly, obviously, Dustin getting the FIPS standards agreed is critical to everybody. So that's really important. And I'll continue to say awareness across the community, because you can still talk to people now and they really don't understand either the quantum risks or how they might address that. So I'm going to continue to say the more we can do around awareness. But if I think forward, I think industry-specific roadmaps, if we take what we've been doing in telecoms, we can replicate that in other industries, because the details will be different. In financial services, for example, is it more important to protect a €100 transaction, or is it more important to protect a $1 billion inter-central bank payment? Okay, that's a risk equation. Bankers are good at that. But those roadmaps about which systems we protect. And then finally, I think the other thing that's really important is to encourage both government and industry to publish good, actionable guidance, because that's the thing that a CISO can take to the board and say, look, I've now been given this as a requirement, either by the regulator of my industry sector or by the National Cybersecurity Authority, and as the insurers will tell you, we do not insure against certainty. So if you are not doing best practice, then you're running an additional risk. By having that guidance, we give everybody the momentum that they need, we give everybody the incentive they need to move to a quantum safe future.
Great. Lamont?
So not to be left out, yeah, Dustin. So make sure, let's all make sure that we're working together with Dustin and with the teams to be able to develop these standards. Yes, and this is the pointy end of that spear that we want to make, that is helping to live that out. But it's all incumbent upon us to be collaborative, working together to make sure that we're testing these algorithms out. We're testing out the processes and procedures. We're testing out just each other's thoughts and ideas on how do we get to that post-quantum era and get there in a safe manner and get there to be successful. Also, too, along the way, taking the information. There's a lot of really good information out there that we're going to be able to, the PQTN paper, there's a lot of other cyber information and data that's out there. Taking it, understanding it, and interrelating all that information so that you can then begin to understand, like you were saying, Zig, there are steps inside of how we do security protection. You're not going to do one big bubble. You're going to have different concentric circles that are going to be rippling out that we're going to have to then focus, with the center being the most important, and then you can continue to build that security out, but then understanding how each one of those relate to one another too, so that you don't have those vulnerabilities and you don't introduce additional vulnerabilities. So making sure that we understand how these things and information, taking that in and relating it to some of the initiatives that you have today going on. Because while this can all be done today, it could be started, prepared, and continually evolving. As we say, we're on a journey. This isn't an end state whenever the standards come out and be finalized and say, okay, this is it. This is what we're going to be moving to. It's not done. We're going to continue to evolve. We're going to continue to do that. So again, work together, collaborate on these things, and continue to plan.
Great. Well, thank you for the time, for the thoughts today. Lori, Yolanda, Luke, thank you for a great partnership. Dustin, thanks for being the single point of failure for the next steps in this journey. And I believe we have some time for Q&A now. Great.